Welcome. Today's webinar is, I think, something that if you understand what I'm talking about and the reasons for what I'm talking about, it can hopefully, which I hope for all webinars, change the direction of your career. And then I'm not just talking today necessarily about, why you take, taking extended breaks. I'm also going to talk about some of the things that are most important in the legal profession and how you portray yourself, your brand, and what's ultimately important for you to get ahead. So don't think that this webinar is just about taking extended breaks. It's about a lot more, and the insights you get from this hopefully will change the direction of your career. And just at the beginning, I do commend everyone for watching this because you're going to learn a lot, and you're going to learn a lot about the legal profession. You're going to learn about how attorneys think. You're going to learn about how to keep going in your career, even though if you have problems, and you're just going to hopefully get a lot out of this. At the start, I want to bring up something that is extremely important, and it's really the foundation of being an attorney. And it's one of the most important things that you can ever remember. And I want to really, at the beginning, I really want to make this point and drive it home to you because this will determine your success in the legal profession. And it's going to determine how long you practiced. It's going to determine how much money you make. It's going to determine how happy you are. It's going to determine the quality of attorney you are, and a whole bunch of other extremely important things that if you understand this fundamental thing I'm going to talk about right now, you're going to be just fine in your legal career. So the number one priority of an attorney, it's this way in law school when you're trying to get a summer associate job or work in a law firm. It's this way when you graduate from law school. It's this way when you're an associate. It's this way when you're a partner. The most important thing about being an attorney and practicing law is to always have access to work. You have to have work to do. If you don't have work to do, you're out of business. So attorneys are expected, once you start the legal profession, which basically is when you enter law school, your job as a law student and as an attorney and as a senior attorney is to always have access to work. And that means that you have to get a job where you're working. It means that you have to be working and not stop working. Because once you stop working, you don't have access to work. So you're expected as an attorney to always be in a position where you have access to work. As attorneys get more senior, they always want to get access to work. They try to get business. That gives them access to work. And so getting work is the most important component of being an attorney. You always have to have work to do. If you don't have work to do, you're essentially out of business, and you have to go and you have to find other people to give you access to work. And that means taking a break is something that's extremely dangerous. If you take breaks in the practice of law and you're not working, that means you don't have access to work. And that has all sorts of connotations in the legal profession, but it means that pretty much that, for whatever reason, you don't want to work or people aren't giving you work. People do all sorts of things to get access to work. They leave large firms and go in-house to try to get access to work when that may not be a steady source of work. They take time off, or they go places where they don't create work. You have to be able to create work, meaning you work for someone, and in a law firm, you have to figure out ways to do more work. You have to get partners and things to give you work. As you get more senior, you have to get partners to give you work, or you have to get your own work. So that's what it's all about. And people do not understand this. They don't understand that the most important thing as an attorney is to have access to work. And the more work you have, by the way, even if you're working hard, that's access to work. You have to also understand a lot of people will quit jobs. And when they quit jobs, they may quit because they don't like the firm. They don't feel like they're being compensated enough. There's too much drama. They're unhappy. They don't like people, whatever it is. But if you are in that situation, you always, of course, want to look for another job, and you should look for one aggressively, especially if you feel like you're going to get fired. But the idea is that if you're an associate or you're a partner without business, the people that you work for are your clients. So you have to learn how to work with difficult clients. You have to learn how to work in difficult situations. And if you don't like it, then you have to figure out how to make it work until you get a new job. But always, an attorney always, by the way, an attorney always needs clients, and people don't understand this basic fundamental. What does that mean? When you're an associate, the partners are your clients. If you become a partner, then and you're working for other partners, those partners are your clients. But your goal is to get clients to work for. So the client could be the US government if you want to work in the government. The client could be a law school if you want to teach in law school. The client could be the clients, if you actually bring in clients, which is the ultimate goal of an attorney, is to have clients and to have your own business as a partner. So I just want to make sure that everyone understands that having access to work at all times as an attorney, once you start law school and you start trying to get jobs in the summer, and then you try to get a job when you graduate, and you have a job when you graduate and you do that job, your goal is to always have work. And the best attorneys inside of law firms impress the partners that they're working for. They do good job, they do good work, they get repeat work, and suddenly a lot of other partners may want to work with them. And those are people that have access to work. You do a good job in a law firm, you have access to work, and people keep you around. Something that a lot of people don't understand, and I will get started with the other aspect of this presentation shortly in the slideshow, but something that a lot of people don't understand also is you could go to a law firm and that law firm could be laying people off and you could be part of that layoff. But what happens when most law firms lay people off is they only lay people off that aren't doing the best work or that aren't getting work from other people. And getting work from other people, if you're billing a lot of hours, that means you're getting work. So the most valuable people are always kept around. And so you want to be one of those people wherever you are. Now, that doesn't mean you have to stay in that firm, but you want to be someone that's always getting access to work. So your entire job as an attorney is to always have work to do. And taking time off and not having work to do is bad. So it's just important to understand it's bad. And the reason it's bad is because it has all these connotations, which I'll talk about today, that, maybe because you weren't, doing a good job, you were fired or left, or you didn't care about having access to work, or whatever, or you're just not a committed attorney, and attorneys have to be committed. So anytime you're in a bad situation, you have to keep working, you have to keep getting work, and then you need to do a job search. And your job search can be aggressive or it can be non-aggressive. I can talk today about a little bit about being, how to be aggressive, but this is very important stuff. I've had candidates before. It's just absolutely insane. I remember I had a candidate that was in New York City, and he lost his job because he wasn't doing enough work. He wasn't getting enough work. He was in a New York office of a firm from Boston, and every Monday at 8:30, this partner in Boston would send out different assignments and stuff that they had, and the first attorney to grab it or whatever would get the work. And this guy was like, "Oh, I'm not going to come in." In New York, a lot of people come in at 10 and work late. He's like, "I'm not going to come in 8:30 on a Monday and grovel for work. Like, they should just give me work." And so that he didn't have any hours. And so because he didn't have access to work or wasn't doing work, he got fired. And then what was interesting is then he was in New York and he was trying to get these interviews. He'd gone to like Columbia Law School, and he was trying to get these interviews with other big firms, and no one was interviewing him. And I was like maybe the third or fourth recruiter to work with him. And then I got him an interview at a pretty good firm in New York, like a AmLaw 100 law firm. And he walked into the interview. He had a screening interview and done okay. And then he walked into the full round of interviews, and he got into the first partner's office to interview him. And the partner took one look at his resume and he said, "You're not working anymore?" And the guy was like, "No." And he said, "I'm sorry, but we're not going to proceed with these interviews. You're going to have to leave," basically. And the guy was just like amazed. And so this is how law firms in competitive markets and different law firms view people that aren't working. They don't like it. And all the questions that, if you're not working, all the questions they have about your commitment, about maybe you got fired, maybe you have other issues, all those questions they don't have to ask if they're hiring someone or interviewing someone that's employed. So you have this major thing that's against you when you take time off or you stop working, and it's not good. There are certain exceptions where it's okay, like if you're a woman taking maternity leave or something, that's not that bad of a thing, and it's not too long. Men that take maternity leave usually get fired you go to a big firm and you think you can take a paternity leave, sure, they'll have a policy that says you can do it. But men that come back to large law firms after taking paternity leave are typically not given work when they come back. The firm will say, oh, it's okay, you take paternity leave. But typically that is not something that law firms like. They're masculine culture. I don't know what it is, but it's just absolutely not respected. So, taking time off for various things, taking time off to travel too much, not showing a full commitment to your job, or just putting the practice of law for a little bit and doing something else and trying to come back. It's absolutely insane. Why would a law firm hire someone like that? And they don't. So I want to just make that very clear at the beginning that, you always have to have access to work. If you're not working, you don't have access to work. Law firms do not like it. It raises all sorts of questions. And you, as an attorney, always need to have work to do. And take maternity leave, sure, you can come back and they respect that. If you have a very serious illness, sure, you can take time off. But people do things like they go take care of their families, or whatever. And that, it makes it much, much harder for them to get back into their legal careers. So, this has serious implications. It has serious implications because if you take too much time off or you're not working, it can have, it can be very, it's very serious. It makes it much harder for you to do. Now, I do want to be very clear that every week our company places people that are unemployed. So you can still get a job, but it's going to be much harder because you're competing against people that are working. And lawyers often like to quit their jobs, often at very good and prestigious law firms, and they do stupid things like become ski instructors, travel through the Far East, open bakeries or write novels. And they think that, that's okay and they can do that. And obviously it becomes much harder for them to get back. One thing I was talking about yesterday with some people was, it was kind of interesting. I was talking about, sort of the models that people follow, and certain people have certain models. So they know when they're dealing with other attorneys and they're close to other attorneys, how serious it is if they take time off, they quit. But other people don't have those models. Sometimes that'll be people from, I would say, working class backgrounds where their parents worked, and if they don't like something, they quit. There'll be people like that. Often it'll be people that are isolated and not part of the, kind of the models of other people. Like, sometimes those are based on, they could be based on racial or religious things where they're not associating with a lot of other attorneys and learning these things. But attorneys whose parents are lawyers typically wouldn't quit. I mean, they understand that, but you have to understand the model that you need to follow. And the model is you don't quit. You find another job, and you learn these things by doing things like listening to what I'm talking about, or you do them with you learn it from peers that are smart. But what you're learning right now is very, very important. People think they can do these things. They're very confident. They think that law firms will welcome them back. They think that they went to a great law school or coming from a big firm. And you may have a good time doing these things, taking a 1-year sabbatical and traveling, but you are giving up a career in most cases, or you're making it very hard. You're drastically affecting your long-term potential and how much you can make. If you stay practicing law for, your entire career and don't take breaks, you will make tens and tens of millions of dollars over the lifetime of your career. But if you take one of these breaks and you decide to take time off, you may decrease that amount by 30%, or over the course of your 10, 15 million, I don't know, but you'll definitely decrease your lifetime earnings. You'll create a situation for yourself where it's going to be very, very hard to get another job. You're going to probably not get into a firm of the same quality, and you're going to have this kind of break on your resume. I work with people like this all the time. I had one guy, it was kind of sad. He had, I'm just going to say it, he had anal cancer, whatever that is, and he took a year off for it. He didn't need to take a whole year off, but he took an entire year off. Then he put on his resume that he had anal cancer. It's just, I took a year off. I made him take it off, but he wasn't getting any interviews. And then he ended up, because he'd taken so much time off, he ended up moving from like AmLaw 50 firm to a firm. He was a litigator that basically did insurance defense. And, it was very, very hard. So he went from, like a firm at the very top of the market to one that was much smaller. He had a couple other moves prior to that where he'd only worked at places a year. And then the place that he worked at before he got sick, he said, he just quit before he even had all these problems being sick because it was too much work. And so why would a firm hire someone that, quit their last job because they thought there was too much work? There's all these sorts of things happen. And just the legal profession doesn't look kindly on this. And, if you are at a major law firm, once you take a break for a few months, it's going to be harder and harder for you to get back to top firms. And this is what happens. So, we work with, like I was talking about a candidate with a recruiter we had this morning. That candidate was, had been at a major US law firm in Washington, DC, like one of the top firms. She quit or wasn't working or was fired or whatever. And she'd been doing her search for 6 months. And prior to working with us, she hadn't gotten a single interview. And we managed to get her a job at kind of a middle market firm, paying probably half of what she would make in a major law firm. And that's just what happens. The larger law firms were no longer paying attention to her. Now, my opinion, the position she got was probably better from a lifestyle perspective and for having a more long-term income and other things along those lines. So it wasn't a bad position that she got, and I think she's probably better off there than she would have been in a large law firm. But the point is that she couldn't get back into a large law firm, and so she quit as a second-year associate. Now she's at a middle market firm. She probably would have been making like $325,000 or more at a large firm, and now she's getting like 150. So that's a huge hit in terms of her income, and the 150 salary is not going to go up lockstep. That's what she's going to make until she's considered for a partner. So she's set herself back by doing that. And I don't think it's a bad decision going there, but I'm just telling you what happens. So, you can deal with serious illnesses. You can have a baby. You can have the death of a close family member, and all these sorts of things can happen to you. But another thing I just want to bring to your attention, and this is kind of sick, but it's true. And I really don't like saying it, and it makes me uncomfortable that I'm even saying it. But if you get sick and you take a lot of time off, and there's nothing, it's nothing you can control getting sick, but an employer that's looking at someone that was sick, and I'm not saying this because I'm saying anything bad about any particular firm. But what I see is law firms not interviewing people that get sick, and or as much, because why would they hire someone who's sick or been sick or at risk of getting sick again, as opposed to someone that's not, or someone that's employed. So you need to be very careful. If you get sick, out 6 weeks or 8 weeks, or 3 months. You try to stay employed at your existing firm. Like, you don't quit because you got sick. You stay employed, and no law firm's going to fire you because you got sick. That's just completely illegal. So, but you shouldn't quit if you get sick. You stay where you're at, and you have employment continuity, and that shows that you're committed, that you're doing good work. They're going to welcome you back. So you just can't pause your legal career. And whether that seems fair or not, a long break means it's going to be very difficult for you to get back into the legal field. Especially not at a top tier firm like you had before. When I was a associate, a summer associate, not a summer associate, when I got out of law school, I was a clerk for a federal judge. And in the same town I was in, it was kind of a small town called Bay City. There was another guy that was working for a magistrate, which isn't as prestigious of a clerkship by any stretch of the imagination. And he'd gone to, I believe, Thomas Cooley Law School, which is not it's back then, I don't know what it's called now, it's something else, but it's, one of the lower tier law schools in the United States. But he'd been taught when he was in school by his career services. Like, when I left my clerkship, I took like 3.5 months off to travel and do all these things. But he said, once you can not take long breaks. Like, he was taught that when he was in, law school. It's like, they taught him that, like, you can't stop practicing. And that was like a big piece of career advice that school gave him. And it was kind of interesting. So, this webinar isn't for people that are struggling to take time off because of their health, well-being, or mental health issues. It's for attorneys that believe that they need believe they deserve a break to make up for all the hard work and long hours and mental effort they've given to feel like they're doing something different. Just a couple of the short points. People do have serious psychological problems. People do have, issues that they're dealing with personally. People do have substance abuse problems and things. But your job is really to, if you have these sorts of problems, your job is to work through them, hopefully, while you're practicing law. So you get a therapist, you get a psychiatrist, you go to AA meetings, whatever you need to do to address those problems while you're practicing is important. And hopefully you don't need to take time off. You can deal with these things while you're employed in a certain way. Maybe you ask the firm and just say, I'm having these problems. Can I take half time for 3 months? Whatever it is, you don't have to tell them it's mental problems, but you do something like that. And so I'm going to tell you today why you should really think long and hard before leaving your firm. I'm also going to cover how law firms will evaluate you if you try to come back. I've already given you quite a few reasons, but I'm going to talk in a lot more depth about that. So the first thing I'm going to talk about is kind of, middle class values and how they relate to taking time off in a law firm. Now, people do not like in the US when you talk about class. They don't like it they don't like it because people came over to the United States really because they were, in Europe and things, they were held back by class systems and things. So people hate it. And so there's a whole kind of mindset in the United States where you're not allowed to talk about class because it upsets people. And it's almost like this genetic thing that runs through all Americans where it might not be as much of a thing, for other types of people. So if you're an attorney, you are middle class for the most part. Middle class people work for the most part, work for people that have more money than them, that control them. They're not independently wealthy, and their job is to impress the upper class, basically, with their work and to take care of the upper class, almost as like servants, but, highly skilled servants. And so this mindset explains, and just think about it, large law firms work for giant corporations, or they work for very successful entrepreneurs that they are middle class. And it explains a lot of times why. And just to give you a little background on class, it's not something that I want to upset you about or anything, but typically you have the lower class that really doesn't care about anything. They don't care about class and things. And, sometimes they try to move up and become attorneys and become middle class. Then you have the upper class, and the upper class is kind of aloof, and you can see they're always getting into trouble and doing these things like with drugs or whatever, or, but the upper class is a different type of person. They have a lot of money. They hire attorneys. They make mistakes and get in trouble and things, whereas you see much less of that about the middle class. It's really trying to, impress the upper class. And it's funny, just a quick aside, things like, if there's a crack cocaine epidemic, it usually starts with the upper class or the middle class, the lower class. So lower class and upper class do not care as much about things. And I'm not going to get too much into it, but this middle class mentality kind of explains why law firms don't like you leaving. Most lawyers, they have mortgages, they have car payments, and they have other responsibilities that once you become an attorney, you take on most of the time those sorts of obligations. And those obligations mean you have to work. And law firms, by the way, they love it when people get married or they buy houses and things because they know that person needs to work. And so they want you almost in a position. I'm just going to say it. They want their people there in positions where they need to pay for all these things and then they have to work. That's just how it works. Lawyers, are for the most part, they save money and stuff, but they're dependent upon paychecks to maintain their lifestyles. Most of them don't have the option of simply picking up and leaving the legal profession because they need money to pay for these things, and they have to pay off student loans, which are in many cases over $200,000. So they're highly leveraged, and they need to work for others. And that need to work for others means that they take their jobs extremely seriously and they always want to have access to work. And that's kind of how it works. And so, middle class people, aspire to work harder and to go far. They want to do better than their parents and stuff. And they typically work their entire careers. They don't rest. And it's just, whatever the middle class job is, it could be being a manager for a company or something, but that's just how it works. I mean, they don't rest. And so the idea to someone that's middle class that someone would voluntarily choose not to work is something that law firms view with suspicion, because you're not kind of falling in with the mentality and the sense of obligation and so forth that other attorneys have, and that they don't identify with that. And so if someone, sees someone that's gone off course, they will be suspicious and they won't really understand, why you're doing this. Do you not, are you not setting up a life and being middle class and so forth? And, it's just, attorneys work for others and they work hard for others, and that's how they get value. And so people that don't do that, it's not something that, that is part of the legal profession. And people that are middle class are very cognizant of how others dress, how others view them. They dress a certain way usually to be, they do all these things. And so this is just how it works. And I'm not trying to make you uncomfortable, but if you look at someone that's lower class, they may not care about how they dress and things. And if you look at someone that's middle class, they're going to dress a certain way usually. And so it's just how it works. And so, the upper and middle class, or typically upper and lower class, do not care as much about what others think of them. I mean, just watch Trump and watch, all these people, and Hunter Biden, and he's probably upper class. I mean, all these sorts of people, kind of what happens. And, so the middle class is really, when you're middle class, you define yourself more so than other people about what others think of you. Think about the type of clothes you wear. Think about, all these posts you may do on Instagram. And I mean, think about, where you think it's important to live. Think about, you want to drive a BMW or whatever, and the cars you drive. Think about how you compare yourself to other people that went to certain colleges. And, so you want to go to the best college, you want to go to the best law school. So, and you want to work in the most prestigious employer. So all these things, if you think about it, are really, they're class based, and they're, people do these things because they're concerned about how others will judge them, whether it's clients, whether it's other middle class people. These are the marks that middle class people use to judge each other. And I'm talking about this just because I want you to understand the mentality, and the mentality that people have. If you're coming from a lower class type environment, a lot of people that are lower class don't understand all this. And so they get into firms and they don't have the models, and they're not acting like middle class people, and they quit jobs, or or whatever. They think they're just at the firm to get paid. But they, if, people that are, you just, being, middle class means you're expected to think about your job in a certain way, think about impressing others in a certain way, always try to be employed, and all these things. And if you don't do that, you're kind of falling outside of the type of people that attorneys are. And I'm not saying being middle class is a bad thing, but upper class people probably would not sit there and work 2,500 hours a year and for a paycheck, and based on how other people think about them. They have their own independent money, they can do, whatever. And it's just different. So here's some of the reasons that you shouldn't leave your current firm. And I'm just going to tell you how law firms think about it. So, people that leave firms or or are unemployed, the perception and the immediate thought is that the person probably got fired. Now, most attorneys do get fired at some point in their careers, but if you get fired, you always want to try to get a job, when after you want to stay on the website, you want to keep your phone, you want to do all these different things to try to stay employed or look like you're employed until you get a job. But, if you have a gap in your resume and you're not working, law firms will think you got fired. They will think that there's no reason that you wouldn't be working because of this middle class idea, unless you got fired, because they think that people should always need to be working and all this sorts of things. So if you have a big gap in your resume compared to other people, the law firm will believe that you were asked to leave or something happened, And that's a reflection of your legal abilities or your psychological whatever, not getting along with people, not impressing people, and therefore you will look like someone that's not as strong of a candidate. And law firms are businesses, and they select the people that are most likely to succeed there. That means that they will always, if they're confronted with two attorneys with equal qualifications, they're always going to select the person that is employed versus unemployed. You would do the same thing too if you were a law firm. Hire the people that are employed much more than they hire the people that are unemployed. Now, I want to be clear, I can get people that are unemployed jobs all the time. I mean, it's not, the end of the world. You can get them jobs at smaller firms. You can get them, positions at firms that aren't as prestigious because they're not getting as good of applicants, but you're really expected to work. And so if you aren't working, the presumption is that you lost your job. And if you lost your job, it means probably something along the lines of, you lost it because you weren't, doing good work. You lost it because people weren't giving you work to do. You lost it because you got in a fight with people. You lost it or whatever, or you just quit, and you quit because you didn't like working in a law firm. So why would another law firm hire you? Just think about that. Or if you took a break, like they'll think, that's not practicing law isn't the most important thing to you. And so the other thing that will happen with future firms is they will think often that, either fired or you may have some psychological issues. And I see people all the time that leave good firms, and they leave these firms, because of psychological reasons. And so, again, if someone has psychological reasons, why would you hire someone that has psychological problems compared to someone that doesn't have psychological problems? And I'm not saying that working in certain law firms can't cause psychological problems, because it can be extremely stressful, especially if you're in a toxic environment. But your job as an attorney is to manage that, because you're working for partners. Partners are clients, and so how are you going to work with clients in the future? Like if you get business and things, you're just expected to, stay employed, and they don't want to think you have psychological problems. And law firms also, most law firms expect your job is where you spend the most of your life. You go to work and you work during the day and during and so your practice of law is expected to be, all consuming. It's the most important thing to you. You have tried really hard to get into the best law school you could by maybe doing well in college, and then you tried to get the best job you could, and you tried the hardest you could in law school. Lawyers are competitive, and they view each other based on the result of that competition. So if you're dropping out of the practice of law, that says maybe this competition is not the most important to you. Maybe, an attorney is expected to go to a law firm and get the best job they can, and then get the best assignments they can inside of a law firm, and work with, get the most repeat work. And then as they get older, more senior, they're expected to get clients, and they're expected to try to become partners if they do that. And then as partners, they're expected to bring in the most business. So this is what people want, and they want that level of commitment. I see people all the time. Like I had a guy in North Carolina not too long ago, and he had been in real estate finance, and there were like 4 or 5 other people that were at his level. And he did something stupid, like he also took one of these paternity leaves or whatever. But at the same time, he wasn't like all in. Like he wasn't all in. And he went to talk to partners. It's like, oh, how am I doing? And the guy said, compare yourself to the other people in your class. I mean, they're working as hard as they can. They're very serious. They, and all these things, and you just don't have this fire in your belly. And so he ended up losing his job or something. I don't know exactly what happened. And then he was trying to get other jobs, and he ended up not getting another job. And he was in North Carolina, and he moved to New York City to be a contract attorney. And very sad. I mean, he went to Duke Law School or something. And but that's what happens. If you're not all in, then law firms are going to choose the people that are all in compared to you. You would do the same thing if you're a law firm, and they want people that are going to work the hardest. They want people that are going to try to do their best to become partners and work many hours and try to do the best job in assignments. They want people that are all in. Attorneys these days will, say things like, I want to work remotely. I want to work a certain number of hours and things. And, if you're really talented in your practice area or something, then law firms, you can still get hired many times. But again, who would you hire if you were a law firm? Would you hire someone that was all in and trying the hardest they could and working or would you hire someone that's not all in? So if you're not employed, then the law firm will assume that you're not in. And, you need to care about your reputation compared to other attorneys. You need to do all these things. And then, once you drop out, it shows that maybe, you don't have this winning aptitude. Maybe this isn't the most important thing to you. Maybe your career's not as important. And then you need to think about that because that's what, I mean, certainly there are practice areas and different types of firms where you don't have to work as many hours. But a client, if you were hiring, just think about yourself. And I just use the same example a lot, but if you were say you were accused of murder or something and just wrongly you came home and I don't know, your spouse was murdered and the police decided that you were the best, you were the person that probably did it, and for whatever reason they made up all these things that they thought made you the murder, and so you're suddenly in jail for murder, and you need an attorney. You interview a couple of attorneys to help you, and they're just not focused, or they don't come up with really good ideas to help you. It's not the most important thing in the world to them. They've got other things to do, and their family is important, but they'll work on, I mean, you wouldn't hire that person. You would hire someone that was like, I'm going to do everything I can to get you out of this. This is horrible. I mean, this is what I'm going to do. This is what I'm going to do. That would be the person that you hire because that person's all in and your life's on the line. But clients are the same way. They want to hire people that are all in. You would want the exact same thing if you were in trouble and needed an attorney. You would want the exact same thing if you were hiring someone for your company or you were in some sort of litigation. You want people that are all in. The people that are all in are the people that you need, that are the most important to your, that's what clients want. So if you're not all in, then you're sending the message that law is not your number one priority. Now, that doesn't mean you're not going to get hired because people will hire you for your skills and stuff, but they know you're never going to be a partner. They're not going to care. It's not going to look like you really care as much about your career. Clients don't want people that are all in. And when you're working for a law firm and you're working for partners, those partners are your clients and they expect you to be all in. You would want the same thing. So partners are your clients when you're associated. If you're a partner and you don't have any work, then the partners, your client is the other partners. If you're, whatever your role is, even if you're in-house, I mean, the in-house company wants people that are all in as we are not. So this is what, law firms want and clients want. And, there are law firms out there that will talk about, they're collegial, they don't work as many hours, they have really good quality of life, but at the same time, those people that may have really good life, those firms, they still expect people to show up and be all in and really want to do as well as they possibly can in their careers. And that's just important. So the other thing is when you take time off, your legal skills and when you're in a law firm are hopefully continually improving as you do different types of work, as you get exposed to different things, so you become more proficient. So if you take time off, the idea is that, your skills are going to dull a little bit. You're not going to be as sharp. Attorneys, by the way, that take time off, there's this thing I read somewhere, but it was like, once a pilot takes like, more than 3 or 4 months off, they almost never go back to being a pilot. Once an attorney takes a lot of time off, they often never go back to being an attorney. I don't know what that is, but it's an interesting thing. But people will assume that, that you're not proficient anymore, that you're not as good. No, it's not the most serious thing because I think people can, start things and do well, but at the same time, it will not help you like if it is what you want. So you have to be, they will assume that your intellectual, abilities have declined to some extent. So here's how firms consider people that many times that have taken, time off from work. So the first thing is you have to ask is, does the law firm accept the reasons you're unemployed? So law firms will ask about that. They will be curious. Law firms, of course, hire people all the time that have been fired and things. They know that, that's happens. And most attorneys get fired for whatever reason at some point in their careers and are able to recover. But law firms will think about that. So They will think about, the reasons that you may have left. And what I don't like to see is I see all the time, like people, like, I mean, constantly, like their resumes, they took like a year off or 6 months off because they got sick or they need to take care of a family member. But why didn't they go back to their original firm? Like, that doesn't make any sense. Like, why didn't they just take time off and then go back to the original firm? Why would they quit when the law firm may, have a job for them? So sometimes, you can come up with reasons that may not reflect on your day-to-day commitment. They could be, you can sometimes explain it. You have to try to explain maybe that you weren't fired, that your skills are up to date, and if the firm accepts your reasons, then you can often get back into the profession at the same level. But this is what they're thinking. They're thinking, what are the reasons this person gave, and do we like them? And you have to think about your reasons. Are these reasons that you would accept if you were a law firm? How does that make you look compared to other people? Sometimes people will leave their firms because they need to move someplace with a spouse. The law firm won't let them work remotely. I mean, that's a good reason. Sometimes they'll leave because of they want to have a baby or whatever, but why wouldn't they come back? Sometimes, they will, but you have to, sometimes you can say that the law firm just ran out of work. They lost a major client. I mean, there's reasons you can give that can be good, but you need to think about those reasons, and you need to ask, like, what are the reasons that law firms are most likely to accept? And you can, even run the question through ChatGPT and come up with reasons, but they have to be good reasons. The best reason typically is that the law firm, didn't have any more work or whatever. Those are good reasons. But, other reasons, it has to look like you weren't fired. You certainly can bring up illness and things, but just always thinking, does this make sense? Like, why didn't the person come back to the original firm? The other question that they're asking is, are you going to be stable in your next job? So if you're not employed, they want to think they're coming in and they're going to, when you start a new firm, they're going to be introducing you to clients. You're going to be working on behalf of clients. The clients are going to see your work. Clients are going to be, the partners will depend on you to get work done. You're someone that's there to generate money. It takes time to interview you. It takes time to find new people. So are they going to hire someone that's a good long-term revenue generator for them, meaning someone that's going to, the partners are going to depend on, the clients are going to depend on? Are they going to introduce you into this fold and make you someone that's that's there, and you're going to be implanted, into a firm? And so, if you've amassed, if you, have a consistent period of working at the same firm, for a long time before you took a break, meaning you were at the firm for 3 years or whatever, that's a sign that you'll probably commit. But law firms look at your resume, and one of the biggest questions they ask is, they ask, can the person do the work? Meaning, are you going to be able to do it with stress and everything? Then they ask, can the person be managed? Like, are you someone that this is very important to you, and you're going to be, people will give you, assignments and doing things a certain way, and you'll say, no problem, fine. It's very middle class. That's how it works. You have to take orders from people and do what they want, and you have to impress them. So they're going to ask, are you going to be manageable? But another big question they ask is, will you do the job long term? So we want to have someone in our firm that's going to commit, that is going to stay, that we're not going to have to replace. We're not going to, the partners are going to, and the firm's going to be able to make money from. Are you going to stay here long term? And then there's other questions like, do you really want the job? Like, someone that's taken a lot of time off may not want the job. Like, it may not be important to them. And if that's the case, then that also, is an issue for people. Like, are you going to commit to this? Are you going to stay around for a long period of time? And do you really want this? And people want to hire people that really want something. They don't want to hire someone that's going back in the practice of law and doesn't necessarily want it. So you have to come across as someone that really, really wants this job. And you would do the same thing. You would hire someone that wants something over someone that doesn't. That's just how people are. People feel good about people that want to work there. And so, you can demonstrate stability by showing that maybe you have a record of staying in previous positions for a long period of time. But if you've been in, 3 positions in 4 years or 3 positions in 5 years, and then you're unemployed, that's going to hurt you. So, you have to always have access to work and you have to look like you're going to stick around. So if you have a break on your resume, does the law firm really believe that you're going to stick around? Now, I coach people on this stuff all the time for a living. I'm usually able to help them come up with reasons and how they can convince people of this, but it's very important. So you sometimes you'll show that you're going to commit by that maybe you're married and you have children and you need the job and all these sorts of things. Maybe you are part of all these professional associations and taking all the CLE independently. Like it's very, very important. Like it's something you want to do. So if the firm thinks that you're really committed and that you have reasons for being committed and you're going to stick around, even though you're unemployed, then they're going to like that. So the other thing they evaluate, regardless if you're employed or unemployed, is do you have unique experience? Do you have experience that we can use that is very difficult to find in the market? And is there something about you that's unique? So if you're trying to work in major markets like Washington, D.C., there's a lot of attorneys there. There's a lot of attorneys competing for the same jobs. And so do you have very rare experience that they can't find among all those attorneys? Is there something special about you? So your experience can outweigh all of these potential objections about whether or not you're employable. And so law firms will, about whether or not they should hire you. So if a law firm has an opening for a certain type of attorney and you're the best applicant because of all your experience, you can get hired. Another thing, I'm just going to be very clear with you, that often happens is you can go to work at firms that maybe don't pay as much or don't have the best brand, but they need someone like you and they can't find someone because they don't pay enough or whatever. And then that can help you get hired as well. But those are the sorts of things that law firms are going to really base everything on. So it's the law of supply and demand. Are there enough people like you? And if there are at a high paid firm, then that means you need to go to a middle market firm. And sometimes the middle market firms are competitive. That may mean that you need to go to a geographic area. So regardless of whether or not you've taken time off, there's always going to be firms that will hire you if you have decent experience, but it may not be the largest firms. It may not even be middle market firms that can find good people, or it may not even be in the geographic area you're in. But there's like over 100,000 law firms in the country, so there's always places to work. But if you have good experience and they can't find other people like you in the market, you're okay. So law firms will often overlook an extended leave of absence if your practice area is in high demand. So sometimes corporate work gets really, really busy. Sometimes litigation gets very, very busy and they can't find people. So if you have very specialized skills and they need people like you and the work's not getting done and they're having a hard time hiring people, or there's just not enough people on the market, then law firms will often look past that. So if you're like, I don't know, a sophisticated real estate attorney in New York City and you lose your job or you take a hiatus and you've got all this commercial leasing and, acquisition experience and things, there will be middle market firms in New York that won't pay as much that will probably hire you if you're coming from a big firm. If you're at a middle market firm and you quit and lose your job, they may have a difficult time finding people like you as well, other middle market firms. So you can always get a job, but it's if you have good experience, but you don't have good experience and you're not employed, then it becomes a pretty hard sell. So, litigators, structured finance attorneys, all these sorts of people, when there's demand, can get jobs even after extended leaves of absence. And, an attorney's taken like an extended leave from a big law firm in New York. They probably could very easily move to smaller firms in the Midwest that has certain types of experience. One of the biggest and smartest things you can do if you're unemployed many times and you're having a hard time finding a job is attorneys, when they got out of school, well, if you go to University of Miami for law school, you may work in Miami, but you may actually be from, I don't know, St. Louis. And then, you decide you want to go back to St. Louis and you have this very, very sophisticated experience, maybe doing, I don't know, some corporate law or whatever it is. And you're a big firm. And so you can get jobs in St. Louis because there's not a lot of people like you. It's just, and if you're from there, then you live, you grew up in St. Louis, law firms will be like, okay, this person's going to stay or whatever. And we can't find people like this in the market. So that helps you. Sometimes, law firms, it's just the way it is. They will look at people that have really, really good educational qualifications, much different than they would look at, someone that doesn't have those educational qualifications. And that will make them overlook things. If we went to Yale or Stanford or University of Chicago, I mean, that is something that those qualifications, if you're unemployed, will open doors. I see I got this guy in Texas, like Dallas or something, that's unemployed. And I don't know why he was unemployed, but it was not good. I think he quit because there was too much work, but he'd gone to Columbia Law School and done really well there. And he got all this interest, even though there were kind of these, he's unemployed and he didn't get the interest from the largest firms, got a lot of interest because law firms value that. People from Yale Law School all the time are not working or do public interest in things, but when they want to go to law firms, law firms love having someone from Yale. Most law firms don't have anybody from Yale, so things like that. And so your educational qualifications will make firms look the other way many times. And law firms are businesses and they want to have really good client or really good attorneys working for them and that look good to their clients. So it looks very good to a client if someone went to Stanford Law School and everybody in the firm went to whatever state school. I mean, I'm just giving you an example, but it looks very good for firms. So they will often overlook your things you've done based on your educational qualifications. And so those kind of people, look good to the firms. They often can, hold them out as we have this really good, these couple of attorneys from great law school. It can help them get clients. And other attorneys inside of a firm will feel good about themselves when they're surrounded by other people that have these top educational qualifications. And so, but still, if the firms see someone with really good educational qualifications, they think they're going to leave, then they won't hire them. So, some firms like Quinn Manor, for example, seems to me that a firm that is very suspicious of people from like Yale Law School because they typically will leave or they'll want to do things their own way, so they won't be manageable. But it depends. And some firms just really will see someone with great educational qualifications and want to hire them because it makes the firm look better. It makes people at the firm that may not have gone to those top law schools feel better. The people are working there. And, the people that I see that take these leaves oftentimes are people that went to the best law schools. They just have the confidence to think that these qualifications will, carry them through. But, they believe that they're virtually invincible because they've done so well educationally. But just one thing to understand too, if you have very good educational qualifications, is that's just something that early in your career will open doors. That's it. It will open doors earlier in your career, but you're still expected to play by the rules of law firms, which means committing to the job, which means doing the things that people want the way they want, which means, being committed, which means, being all in and all these things. And so if you don't have that, then why would a law firm hire someone that's not going to make them a lot of money, that's going to, not stay there in the long term, that's going to be hard to give assignments to, that's going to want to do things the wrong way, that's going to think that they're above everybody because of their education? You wouldn't hire that kind of person. And so you have to be very people that, think that way, don't understand that law firms are businesses and it's better for them to hire people that are going to stick around and commit than people that think they're better than everyone because of their education qualifications. People do this a lot earlier in their career. They think that their educational qualifications give them this free pass and they can do anything they want and all these sorts of things. And that's just not the case. And success in academics, meaning going to a good law school and doing well on law school exams, has nothing to do with working for other people. It actually, if you think that it does, it may, again, open doors. It's not going to make you a good attorney and commit in the long run. It's interesting. I bring up this point. We recently did this research report at BCG. I don't know if it's come out yet, but people that start a lot of times at, not the largest law firms, middle market firms, they may not have gone to the best law schools. They typically make more money over the course of, 30 plus year career than the people that didn't, because the people that didn't will often, drop out. They won't learn how to develop business when they're young. They will work in environments that churn as opposed to, all these sorts of things. So it's just something to think about. And I often see, people from, the best law schools. Most law schools are very liberal. I mean, certainly University of Chicago and University of Virginia are, but the best law schools are pretty liberal. And these liberal law schools kind of indoctrinate people into the professors are liberal, many times socialist. The students are taught to think in a liberal way. They get good grades in exams when they pair up these liberal ideas as opposed to conservative ideas. They become liberal, and they may think, pro bono is important. They question the establishment. They're suspicious of employers, and so these people, they may, they that do well in the practice of law may not be as intellectually gifted or gotten the best law schools, but they're just committed to it, and they're not arrogant, and they don't think that they're above the rules and things that firms have. They just want to work, and those are the best attorneys. So I hope all this has given you so far just a very good understanding of, why you should stay with a firm, why you should stay employed, the mindset you need to have as an attorney, all these things that people often don't understand, and what's the most important. One final point that I just want to bring up, and I talk about this a lot in webinars, but I think that this particular point is exceptionally important. When you're an attorney and you're, in your first 5 or 6 years, you should not really be that concerned about your compensation. There's a whole bunch of different reasons for that, but the main reason is because it takes about 5 years to learn any practice area. So you show up in a law firm, and I don't care, like, if you have a job paying $100,000 a year, $200,000 a year, $300,000 a year. What you're getting is you're going someplace, like you've gone to law school and done all this nonsense and paid for it, and taken the bar and passed it, and you're going to a law firm, and what's happening there is the law firm is training you in a practice area, and you're literally getting paid, which is incredible, to be given all this work to do and to get trained in a practice area and to get the tools you can use for the rest of your career. So if you start your career at age 25, you're done with training by the age of 30, and then you have all these things that you can use to get clients, to get other jobs. And so being committed, like, earlier in your career and getting the best training possible is important. Now that, you can start out at a smaller firm and then, want to move to a bigger firm because they're going to work on bigger clients. You're going to get better training, be able to look at the work in more depth. But that's what you're getting. Like, it's incredible. Like, you're literally getting paid money to learn how to be an attorney and to get these skills you can use the rest of your career. You are not there to, you're certainly there to make money, but that's not what's going on. You're getting training, and this training is hugely important. It makes you learn how to be an attorney. And, there's other, in the medical profession, it may take people till they're 35 to get the training. And, and they don't get paid a lot of money during that time. And so getting this training makes you an attorney. And so you should try to stick around and get training. People don't drop out of law school for a year to take personal time off. I mean, I've heard of it, but I never saw it when I was in law school. People push through because they know they need to commit. They're paying for it. But when you're an attorney and you're getting paid, you're getting training, and you need access to work. Everyone needs access to work. If you don't have access to work, you're in trouble. It shows that you're not impressing your clients, which are the partners. It shows that you're not as committed. It shows all these different things. And if you've lost your job and you're unemployed, you can get another job. But when you get that other job, you need to show some level of commitment. You need to put yourself all in. And that's the job of attorneys. Attorneys are expected to work for clients and to impress them. I remember when I was at Quinn Emanuel, and even today, I mean, John Quinn, who is the founder of Quinn Emanuel, I'm assuming someone in his position that started that firm is probably, I mean, worth, I mean, I don't know, but I mean, sure, $100+ million, or maybe 200, maybe 300, I don't know, worth a lot of money. But he meets a client and it's yes, sir, yes, sir, yes, person is paying. That's how attorneys act. Who cares? He doesn't care he's worth 300 million. He has to act a certain way. And that's how attorneys are. And attorneys go to court and they're like, yes, Your Honor, yes, this, yes, this. They don't have all this arrogance. They're working for other people and they're committed. And that's what you need to be. And so if you take time off or you lose your job and you don't find a new one quickly, then then it doesn't look good. And you have to be very, very careful about this. And if you're sick, you keep your job. If you're, and you come back and you just don't leave your firm if you can't help it. And anybody can get a job. I mean, there are in every state, there's tons and tons of municipalities of all these places and cities where you could work. You don't need to work in whatever city you're in. You need to find a job. And this is what doctors do. Doctors get assigned a place to be a residency, and they might be working in Los Angeles, and suddenly they're in, whatever, like Tulsa, Oklahoma, and working for a hospital. But they're there. They don't care. They're there to get training, and that's what it is. They may want to work in Los Angeles, or they may think it'd be really cool to work in Miami. But wherever they get their residency is where they go to get their training, and they do not care because the training is the most important thing. So you need to find jobs wherever you possibly can. You should not be, if you're unemployed or you think you're going to lose your job, you definitely should not be only looking for positions in the area you're in if it's too difficult. You should definitely not be looking at firms of the same size. You should definitely not be sorting the places you're applying to based on the salary. You need to get a job. You need to get that training. And even if you're like beyond 5 or 6 years and you don't have the training, you need to be in a position, and you do have the training, and you don't need to necessarily be trained as much. You still have training to do. You still have to learn how to bring in clients and all these things. And one of the reasons taking jobs outside of the practice of law, in my opinion, inside of law firms is so dangerous, is because once you take a job outside a law firm, you go in-house or something, you're working essentially for one client, and you're dependent upon them for work. You're dependent on that company staying in business. You're dependent on that company not merging. You're dependent on the company having, taking you as a cost center, I mean, you cost money as opposed to a profit center. You're dependent on a CEO coming in that wants their own legal department. Maybe they come in and they don't want their own legal department. You're dependent upon pissing off maybe the CEO and losing your job. You're dependent upon a new general counsel coming in and potentially, replacing you. You're dependent upon bringing in their own legal department, which GCs do. You're dependent upon the company not going out of business. And most companies go out of business and merge, and all these things happen. If they merge, they may get rid of part of their legal department. So you need to have access to work. The greatest thing about working in law firms is you learn a skill, you're making the firm money, and then you can take that skill and do all these things. You can develop business, you can go to all these things, so you can continually have access to work. And this is what you need. And so, if you don't have access to work, you're making long-term decisions that are going to have significant consequences potentially for the rest of your career. And, is that what you want? I've told you several examples about people from major firms that lost their jobs and are going back to working, in a law firm. And many times the people from major firms get new positions paying half of what they were making. Now, I think a lot of these jobs are probably better for them because they might have long-term career stability there. But at the same time, this is what happens. So taking time off is not good. It's going to make it much harder for you to get a job. It's going to raise questions about why you're not working. Then, you may have excuses, family problems, and everything like that. But then the question again is, why aren't you going back to the firm you were at before all this stuff happened? So think about those things and think about how it looks when you lose access to work. I've told you a lot of examples, but I have another example of this guy that was at a major law firm. I think it was in New York, and he got an in-house job, and he moved to like Durango, Colorado. It was a company there he's working for, and he was there. He bought a house, and he was there like 3 months, and then the company closed down or something, or went out of business, and he was sitting there in Durango, California. His kids were in school. He was working in a place where there wasn't a lot of demand for his skill. He didn't know what he was going to do, and so he lost access to work. So in-house is very dangerous. I see people when I log into BCG and look at new resumes coming through each day. I always see people that have been at have gone in-house and been unemployed for long lengths of time, and always people like that every day. And it's sad because they lose access to work. And the big one I'm seeing now is the government. So the government's laying off thousands of attorneys with this Doge or whatever, and when Trump came in, and so these people are all have lost their jobs, and and are taking buyouts and things and don't have any work and are applying to work and trying to get jobs in law firms and things, and law firms aren't hiring them. Law firms do not hire people, by the way. It's almost impossible. I mean, it happens, but if you go to work for the government or you go in-house, then that shows a lack of commitment to working in a law firm. And they have no way of evaluating your skills. Everyone knows what it means to work for, if you're working at Skadden Arps and you're like 6 years in, but no one knows what it means if you go to work at Apple after 3 years and what type of legal experience you're getting and how that translates into a law firm. So you lose access to work. And so this is what you need to base your entire career as an attorney around, is always having work to do and understanding why law firms think it's so important and why you don't look that good when you've taken too much time off. Okay, so I will take a quick break, and we'll take a quick break for everyone here. When I come back, I will answer questions. There are quite a few questions. I will get through as many of them as I can. I am going out of town today, so I haven't packed yet. So I need to, I won't do all the questions today, but but any questions that you ask, I'll try to make sure that I answer related questions so everyone kind of gets the answers they're looking for. And I will be back in just 1 minute, and then we'll get started with questions. Thank you. Okay, let me just pull up the questions here. Give me 1 second. And by the way, for everyone on this webinar, I can't, tell you how impressive it is that you're spending the time to listen to this, taking time out during the day, because just what I talked to you about today, I mean, it, change your life. Because once you understand the stuff, and a lot of people don't, a high number of people don't, but once you understand the stuff, it really can make a huge difference in what happens to you over the course of your life. So let me just work on this here real quickly. Okay. First question is, you mentioned that let me just make sure that's in the right nonsense. You mentioned even taking a few months off could jeopardize your return. Are there exceptions like sabbaticals or wellness breaks that firms feel? Let me make sure I'm not sharing the right screen. It's okay. Okay, question is, you mentioned that even taking a few months off could jeopardize your return. Are there exceptions like sabbaticals or wellness breaks that firms feel to be more favorably? So if you're going to take a break, you take it at your existing firm. And then while you're taking a break, you probably want to be looking for a job. You don't take a break and then try to get a job at another firm. If you were a law firm, you're going to hire someone that doesn't take sabbaticals or wellness breaks. Clients, if you're working, you own your own law firm, or you have clients as an attorney, which you're expected to do. You can't take breaks from your clients. No, I mean, so if you take a break, you try to do your existing firm and explain it, but preferably if you're doing it, you're not necessarily going to be viewed favorably when you come back. So you want to make sure that any break that you take, you have the ability to keep access to work. What exactly counts as a major life event and would compassionate leave or caregiving qualify? Yes, of course it does. And you can, I see people all the time with their resumes with things when they talked about these major life events and things happen that they took care of their parents and stuff. And at the same time, again, you want to try to stay employed at your existing firm when this stuff happens. Most law firms are not going to fire someone, where their spouse is dying or something. I mean, so major life events tend to be things, people getting sick, they can be illnesses, they can be, just all sorts of different things that can happen to people. And so, yes, compassionate leave or care will qualify. But, as I said earlier, you want to make sure that you're able to come back to your firm. If I need a break from mental health, are there strategies so law firms won't view it as commitment issues? Again, if you take a break, you try to stay employed at your existing firm. And then if you have mental health issues, you have to think about, maybe this isn't the type of environment that I want to work in the long term. It just doesn't do it for me. And there is nothing wrong with, not wanting to work in a law firm, or even not wanting to be an attorney, or not working in a stressful practice area. So you could work in a really stressful practice area. And if you do something like that, or you work in a very stressful firm that causes mental health issues, then you can certainly find other firms where the work's not going to be as stressful. So you have to be careful about that. Let me just see. I'm just looking at a lot of these things. Are there specific types of law firms or practice areas that are more open to rehiring attorneys after long absences? Well, any practice area where it's difficult for the law firm to find people is going to make it easier. So whatever that practice area is, if there's a lot of demand in the market, or if you have very specialized skills, then yes, law firms will be more open to hiring you. Also, law firms that have a difficult time finding people where, that's not easy for them because there's not enough, they don't pay enough. There's not enough attorneys in particular geographic market that will work for the salaries they want, or just enough people in your practice area, then yes, you can get rehired. But just keep in mind that at the same time, you're being evaluated with people that are currently, have something else. I'm trying to ask, I've got a lot of questions, but I'm trying to ask the ones that relate to the webinar first, and then I'll start answering your other questions. Okay, could I take time off and then return as a consultant or freelancer instead of in-house as a pathway back? Well, a consultant or freelancer typically will mean that you're working as a contract attorney or staff attorney or something like that. For some people, that's the career that they want. They don't like the accountability of working in a firm and having to be there a certain number of hours and so forth. But once you take a consultant or freelancer or contract attorney or staff attorney job, the problem with that is in almost all cases, law firms are not going to evaluate someone that's a consultant or freelancer or staff attorney to an associate again. It shows a lack of commitment to working in a law firm, or it telegraphs the ability that, or the fact that you may not be someone that is as committed to working in the same way other people are. So why would someone hire someone that's in a position where they don't look like they're committed, or where they're not doing the best work? So what is wrong with being a contract attorney or staff attorney? You're not going to be given as sophisticated work as the associates. You're almost always not going to get a position back. You're going to show a lack of commitment to the practice, to the type of environment that a law firm has. You're going to be in a position where, it's going to look like maybe you couldn't get a job as an associate or whatever. It's also going to put you in a position where it's very easy to lose your job. So when work slows down, the first people to go, the staff attorneys and contract attorneys, they protect associates, and they're the ones that are protected when things slow down. So the first people to lose their jobs are going to be the contract attorneys and the people, other staff attorneys. So that's just how it works. And so if you want to, continue practicing law, you in a law firm, that's a very risky proposition. And I always recommend that instead of being a staff attorney or contract attorney, maybe you work in a smaller firm or whatever. You take a job that you can get as a real associate or whatever it is, because being a staff attorney or contract is very risky. I was working with a guy. He went to University of Virginia Law School, and he worked in a big firm in Washington, D.C. And then he decided he was going to go to work for some lobbying organization or something. And then he lost his job, and he literally, wasn't able to get another job again. He just couldn't, get another job in a law firm. And when he came to me, he was working as a contract attorney at kind of a mid-sized firm in Ohio, which was the only job he could get. He was the staff attorney, and he was getting paid like very little. Like he was making the equivalent of whatever, $300,000 a year when he left his big firm job. And then, the best job he could get was for like a contract attorney, like, or a staff attorney, like $75,000 a year in Ohio. He couldn't even pay his student loans. And, because he made that mistake of leaving. And, when I started working with him, he was at a position where I think he might have just given up practicing law. So, very, very, very careful about, leaving or being a consultant or freelancer or something like that. It's sad, but I have a lot of stories to tell. But I was working with this guy that was like the top of his class at University of Law School, and he was 6 months in working at this law firm and pissed someone off and got fired. And he couldn't get another job. And I got him a couple interviews. He got one offer with a really good firm, and then he was conflicted out. So he was unable to get another job in a law firm, and started like a criminal defense firm in Washington, D.C. And I saw his resume, years later, and he'd been doing that for like 7 or 8 years. And that's just sad. I mean, he lost his job. He didn't get another one. He was too young, and he was only looking at, larger law firms. And so, that's that. So that's what happened. Okay, here is one thing I just wanted to bring up. And this is actually interesting because I was reading a Reddit thread the other day, and I'll talk about this for briefly. So if quitting law altogether is tempting, let me just see here. So if quitting law altogether is tempting, what are the most common legal careers attorneys pivot into, and how do law firms view such detours? Well, if you go into a non-legal career, then law firms aren't going to view it well, and it's going to be next to, depending on what type of firm you want to go into, to get into the same caliber of firm you left is going to be next to impossible. But there are so many non-legal careers that attorneys can do. Attorneys succeed starting businesses. Attorneys succeed being recruiters. Attorneys succeed, in joining companies and managing their HR process. I mean, there's so many things that lawyers can do with a law degree, and just because you don't want to practice law anymore doesn't mean you can't be successful. And in most cases, people that went to law school and do other careers actually end up being much more successful than they would have been, and happier than they would have been if they continued to practice law. The reason they're successful is because they have the drive and motivation to go to law school and do well. They're concerned about advancing in things, and they take those skills and they come up against people that may not be as as important. I mean, they come as they would have been trying to stay with the practice of law and doing something they're happy about. And by the way, I mean, if you're unhappy practicing law, it's a good idea to do something else. I mean, there's nothing wrong with leaving the practice of law if you don't really like it. But many times people don't like the practice of law because of the firm they're in, or the environment, or the practice area. So you have to think about, is it something that you really want to do, or do you not like working on behalf of clients and having to do all this work and being, in writing or writing contracts or whatever you're doing? If you really don't enjoy it and you don't see yourself enjoying it, even in a different type of firm, then I think that you're not making any type of mistake doing something else. If you really fully know that you don't like practicing law, you don't like what it is, you're unhappy sitting in an office, pounding out work or in your home or whatever, then try something else. There's nothing wrong with that, because attorneys become enormously successful doing other types of careers. And so I don't think you really have to, worry about it too much as much. I mean, if you don't want to practice law, there's nothing wrong with not doing it if you really know that. How do I transition from a government attorney role into private practice? Well, one of the problems of going to work for the government, unless you're doing like a federal clerkship or you're a US attorney or something, learn how to be a criminal attorney, it's very difficult to transition back into private practice. The reason it's difficult to transition back into private practice is because you've shown that you don't have a commitment to working in law firms, you've done something else. Now, people do all sorts of things. They become congresspeople, they work in important branches of the government, they do things that make them more marketable to law firms based on the prestige of whatever they're doing. But in most cases, people go to work in types of government practices where their skills aren't as marketable. Now, in Washington, D.C., there are firms that hire different types of people from the government all the time. There are jobs for people that have worked in the government doing various things. You could work as government contracts and get a lot of, there's things that people do working in the government, but it's very difficult to transition back into private practice. When you're working for the government, the hours aren't as long, the expectations aren't as great, and some government positions, but it shows a lack of commitment to working inside of a law firm. So if you're a law firm, why would you hire someone that went to work in the government as opposed to someone that's not working in the government? It just shows the lack of commitment to private practice and the skills you get working as a government attorney. You're not working for paying clients, you're working for the government. Those skills are not as marketable to a law firm as you'd like them to be. But what is the solution to all this? The solution is, and the fact is, that anyone can get a job in a law firm. It just depends what type of practice area, how much a law firm pays, where you going to get the most, bang for your buck. And where are you going to get hired? Because where you're going to get hired often means you're often going to get hired. You can get hired at smaller firms, and you have to figure out firms that may not be, at the highest level that you would want to work at. But there's so many law firms out there, anybody can get hired. How can I improve my legal writing skills to impress law firm partners? Okay, I was working with a woman not too long ago, and she was working in this law firm, working really, really hard. And she one day said, can you give me any feedback on what I can do to be a better attorney? And I think he was doing data privacy. And she'd gone to a good law school and done well and everything. And they said to her, oh, you could improve your legal writing a bit. So she went out and got a federal clerkship. And because she realized that she'd be working directly with a partner doing that and would get good experience doing, learning how to, I'm not a partner, but working with the judge, who giving her feedback on her writing and stuff. And so, you can do a clerkship. Clerkships are a great way to learn how to be a better writer. There's also, classes and things you can take. But in my opinion, with ChatGPT and with things like Grammarly, which I don't know you need as much anymore now that there's ChatGPT, you can get a lot of feedback on your writing. You can learn to make your writing very good. You can find arguments you might not have normally found by using ChatGPT or whatever you use, Grok or all sorts of things. So people can definitely improve their legal writing, but it's not as hard as it used to be. I mean, you had to, it used to be you had to, edit all your stuff and you had to mark it up and then you had to, print it and read it again and, spend hours like making sure these research and stuff is perfect, but it's not like that anymore. You can fix your writing many times very easily, by using these tools. And I don't think for most people, legal writing really needs to be as much of a problem anymore as it used to be. ChatGPT and these things will just kick out awesome, writing, help you like turn in flawless things and make sure you catch arguments. It'll even catch cases for you. You have to check the cases and make sure they really stand for what they say. But you can do that. You can have contracts marked. You can do all these different things. Okay, what are the risks and rewards of starting my own firm? Well, if you start your own firm, you're going to have to, be able to get clients. And so no one can start their own firm if they don't know how to get clients. And so that's a big risk. Like, are you going to be able to get clients? And so that's one of the most important things to kind of be aware of, is that if you start your own firm, are you going to be able to get clients? And then are you going to be able to hold on to those clients? And are you going to be able to get paid by those clients? It's difficult. I mean, when you have your own firm, it's not as easy as you might think. I mean, clients will negotiate bills. Some of them will pay. When you're a smaller firm, it's much more difficult to get larger clients if you have your own firm, because larger clients want a brand behind them. So it can be very difficult. You have to do your own work. You don't have secretaries and things most of the time helping you. But what are the rewards? The rewards are huge. The rewards are, once you learn how to bring in clients or get work, you can have a practice that will last you your entire work, your entire career. And people start their own firms all the time. They're happier. They're not reporting to people. They have clients going directly to them. Sometimes you can grow your own firm. You can start hiring people and expand it. So there's all sorts of really great rewards for starting your own firm. And most people that do it, I mean, that are really committed and are excited about it, can do very, very well. And oftentimes people will start their own firms in practice areas where they may not even have experience. Like a litigator, I know, one starts a family law firm, or a corporate attorney starts a trust and estates firm, and then people do that and they can do very well. So there are lots of rewards for starting your own firm, and it can be a very, very smart thing. Let me just see. Okay, this is a good question. So the next question is, how do I navigate a law firm merger's impact on my career? So when a law firm merges, there's a lot of things that can happen. One of the things that can happen is sometimes there's a more powerful firm that merges with a less powerful firm, and then that more powerful firm is going to have more impact on your ability to be a partner, because they may choose what happens, and then so they'll have more insight into that and all sorts of things. I had a crazy thing happen. I was at a firm, Dewey Valentine, that merged. These people came over from Paul Hastings, and the people that came over from Paul Hastings, some of them were very powerful partners. I mean, one of them had, I think this is back in 1997, 98, had a $30 million book of business. So this partner came over with a bunch of people, and other partners from Paul Hastings had a lot of business. And there were people that had been at Dewey Valentine there was one guy that had been there for like 10 years. He was a real estate attorney, and he, had been at Latham & Watkins for a year or something, or 2 years, went to Duke Law School, was very talented. And he was told before this merger he was going to make partner the next year. And so he came up to the partner announcements or whatever, and the people that were elevated to partner in the office, there was a couple of them were associates that come over with the Paul Hastings people, and they had the partner, the people from Paul Hastings had more pull all of a sudden than the people that he'd been working for before at Dewey Valentine. So instead of them having the power to make him partner, the Paul Hastings people made the other person partner, the other people partner. And then he actually ended up getting fired, and he wouldn't have been fired had there not been a merger. So mergers are very dangerous. The culture of the firm can change. The people in the power can change. You can, go into environments where you're working with people whose work styles misalign with yours. Many times in a merger, the people that merge approach things in different ways. They're worried about getting compensated in different ways than partners, and it can be very toxic. And you can get kind of these sets of one partners that were there originally and the ones that weren't there originally, and then the two groups fight and disagree on things. People leave, sometimes, all sorts of bad things can happen. So mergers can be very dangerous unless the overall group of the people merging are very, similar, and the law firm has, very, very good management, and everything kind of works. But a lot of times it won't work. Okay, next question is, there's not a lot I can do for this question, but I'll answer anyway. What steps should I take in law school to avoid career gaps that could hurt me later? So as a law student, you want to make sure, if you want to work in a law firm, the most important thing you can do is get a summer job in a law firm, hopefully in your first summer, but definitely in your second summer. So law firms, when they hire new attorneys, have a strong preference for people that have been attorneys during the summer. So if you've been an attorney during the summer somewhere, then you're more likely to get hired. Now, that doesn't mean you have to be a summer associate in a major law firm. That just means you have to have a job. And sometimes even just volunteering in a law firm can help you. It just depends. I knew one woman that didn't do all that well in law school, and she got a summer job with someone doing trademark law, and was making like maybe $15 an hour or something, and ended up because of that experience getting a job in a major U.S. law firm doing trademark work. So you try to get jobs when you're in law school. If you want to work in a law firm later, your odds of getting a decent law firm job are going to increase by several multiples, like 5 times, if you're able to get a job in the summer. And it's much more difficult, I don't know why it is, to get a position, if you haven't worked in a law firm prior to trying to get a full-time position in a law firm after you graduate from law school. So everybody that's in law school should do the very best they can to get some sort of summer job, even if it doesn't pay. Just having that experience in your resume will make you much more marketable. How can you get a summer associate position on not a top law school? So if you're not a top law school, what happens is that you don't get a lot of people coming for on-campus interviews. You're competing with attorneys that may have gone to better schools and that are, more marketable, because the only thing that a law firm really has to evaluate you on when you're in law school is the quality of your law school and how well you did there, or you're doing there. So it's much more difficult to get a summer associate position. So what does that mean? So you can always get summer positions at smaller firms. You don't have to worry about how much they pay, but you need to get experience when you're in law school. Now, you may feel badly about yourself that you go to a law school where you're not able to get one of these high-paid summer associate jobs that people from top law schools have get. People have always felt badly about that for decades, or generations, when they can't do that at a top law school. But you can always get some sort of summer job, and that summer job will give you some training and will make you more marketable later on. Sometimes you'll maybe get an associate job there. So you shouldn't really worry about trying to compete at the highest level and get a summer associate position paying a lot of money. That's less than 5% of the attorneys in law school that get those types of jobs. You can, if you are not going to your top law school and you really want to work in one of these larger firms, and the thing that's going to make you most marketable is your performance. So someone that goes to Wayne State University Law School, which I don't think is a bad law school, but it's in Detroit. It's like more of a local law school. They're going to have a very hard time getting into a large firm, even outside of Detroit, if they don't finish very high in their class, or that, they're not like a top ranked student. So, and so, what I mean by top ranked student, I mean, they probably like ranked 1 to 5 or something per class. I mean, they have to do well. So that's just something, to keep in mind, and, about, what you should, trying to work through these based on that type of question. But that's just something to keep in mind in terms of, getting to summer association. Most people don't. You shouldn't feel badly about yourself. And again, people that are committed to the practice of law kind of follow the rules that I've talked about in this webinar. It doesn't really, matter where you start. You can always move up. And people, a lot of times, may not get summer associate positions in a big firm, or they get some sort of experience from their law school and they start at a smaller firm, but they do very, very well there, and they develop skills, and then they move to a bigger firm, and sometimes they wind up with, very top firms in the country. It's just amazing. But you can always move up. So wherever you start, it's not where you have to end up. Okay, what's the best way to choose a practice area as a law student? So law students typically don't have also often the luxury of choosing a practice area. When I was a summer associate in a big New York law firm, they were basically like, they gave me a lot of corporate work to do and some litigation, but then they were like, at the end of the summer, they're like, we're going to, if you want to work here, you're going to have to be a corporate attorney. It's like, what? Corporate attorney, and I didn't want to be a corporate attorney. So they chose my practice area for me. And so a lot of times law firms will, if you try to work in a law firm, it's kind of the job that you get, and whatever practice area they have as a law student. So as a law student, you kind of have two different options in terms of the practice areas you choose. You either do something related to usually litigation, or you do something related to transactional law. People that are good at litigation typically enjoy writing. They enjoy analyzing things and talking about them, and they are much happier doing things like history and English, those sort of philosophy, anthropology. That's kind of where their minds go. And if they had their choice of classes in college or whatever, those are the kind of things they would take. People that are transactional would enjoy economics. They would enjoy math, sciences, and different things, statistics. That would be where their interest would gravitate towards. So if you want to do transactional law is real estate, corporate, different types of IP. There's all sorts of transactional practice areas that you should try to do something related to that, because that's your skill. And if you like writing and English and things, then you try to do things related to litigation. And there's hundreds of different types of litigation jobs. I mean, there's just, it's just amazing, like how many different practice areas there are. And I'll just show this to kind of everyone just because it's kind of fun. I'll just show you a BCG. Let me just see here. Give me 1 second. Okay, so you go here and these are different practice areas. So if you go here, candidate search, this candidate search, you go to practice areas. I mean, you have all these different practice areas. You've got like antitrust, you've got bankruptcy, it's kind of transactional and litigation, you've got corporate, you've got construction, but even construction, you have, transactional, which would be agreements, you have litigation, and then you even have different types of litigation. Like you want to do plaintiffs or defense. You have corporate, look at all these practice areas. And then you have, data privacy is kind of transactionally, but education, which will, all these different things. You have your practice areas, you'll have plaintiffs, and then you'll have defense, and just all these kind of different practice areas. Finance is transactional, healthcare could be litigation or transactional. You have all these different types of IP, patent is transactional, trademark can be transactional. You have just all these different things that people can do. So just keeping in mind, and I just will show you litigation here. I mean, it's insane. Look at all these different types of litigation there are. So if you want to be a litigator, I mean, there's lots and lots of things you can do. And if you enjoy litigation, then you should do something related. If you enjoy reading and writing, you should do something related to that. And so let me just see here, make sure I get back to that. Okay, so that's how you choose a practice area. You choose it based on where your interests go. If you like to take corporate classes and all these different things in law school, then that's probably where your interest is. Let me just see. It's just another question. Do smaller or boutique firms handle absences differently than large firms? Yes. So it just depends. So different types of firms will have different types of people in them. So if it's a smaller boutique firm, it may be difficult for them to find people. So if you take an absence, then at that firm, then it might not be as serious as it would be at a large firm. If you try to transition into a smaller firm after taking an absence from a bigger firm, it's going to be easier because that smaller firm's going to have a more difficult time hiring people. It may not pay as much, but it's not something to worry about, too much. If you guessed, you can get into a smaller boutique firm easier. And smaller boutique firms are small, and each of them will have different types of cultures and ways of doing things. And so it's often, much easier to transition to a smaller boutique firm if you're from a large firm. Large firms just have a business model where everybody's supposed to work hard and where they have a lot of people wanting to work there because of high salaries. And so anytime you take your skills and you try to go someplace else, or you've been in a small firm that doesn't pay as much, where it's harder for them to find people, then it becomes much easier. That's a good question. Another question. How do law firm attitudes towards absences compare to compatible professions like medicine or academia? So, it's the same thing. So, I believe, I don't know a ton about medicine, but, if you're in academia and you're writing papers and you're doing well and that sort of thing, then yes, I don't think it's very difficult to get back. Academia is just kind of what it is. And there's a lot of law schools and some pay well, others don't. But, your objective as a law professor is always to get tenure. So, you have to go to some school and commit, write a lot of papers and look very, very strong to get tenure. And in medicine, if you're trying to get training and, whatever, orthopedic surgery, or, whatever it is, or, reading you have to, you can't drop out of a residency or something and expect to go back very easily. And there's prestige levels of that. So I think law firm attitudes towards absences are, similar. I think that in academia, it's obviously going to be harder to get back on track if you leave and you're not a tenured professor. So, all these comparable professions, law firm attitudes, are very similar, I guess, to those. But again, you have the choice. Anytime someone takes a break in medicine or academia or a law firm, it just means that maybe you're not going to be able to get jobs as easily at the same level as the ones that you had, the jobs you had prior to leaving. But you can always get back on track. See a couple law firm questions. This question's from a law firm. I only have time for a couple more. So if you've asked questions and I haven't been able to get to them, I've been trying to ask questions that are similar, but if you put your questions, I have all the questions in the chat. So I will try to, write all these down, and then next week save these, and then next week I will answer them for you. And I'll try to answer them first if I can next week. Okay, what risks do we face when hiring attorneys returning from long breaks, and how can we mitigate them? So when you hire an attorney that's been from a long break, you need to, the risk you face, and those long term, write this down, good work. So these are kind of the big ones. So, if somebody's returning from a long break, the biggest risk is that they're gonna probably leave again. Most of the time when someone takes a long break for whatever reason, they end up leaving again. The other thing, and so you have to risk that, and you have to really understand, is this person going to stay? You also have to understand, can they do the work? Because one of the big risks is they may have left their last job or be unemployed because they didn't do the job well and people didn't like them, or they couldn't work in a law firm environment. You just don't know that. So you have to, when you're evaluating them, you have to say, can this person do the type of work that we have? And are they going to work under our business model, whatever, working long hours or whatever it is? Are they going to be able to do it? Are they going to be manageable? Are they going to do what we say to do? When people have been independent and want to practice a lot of times, they think, why would I be doing this? I'm so much happier not doing it. So that's a manageable thing. And then the other thing is, do they want the job? So, what are the reasons that the person wants to go back to a law firm? They really convincing? Are there really good reasons for this? And so you have to ask that. But hiring attorneys after long breaks, and I'm sorry for everyone that's call this an attorney listening to this, is very dangerous. So you have to look at these factors. Like, does it look like they're going to commit next time? Did they leave their last job because they didn't like being managed, or do they really want the work? And so those are kind of the big things that a law firm needs to consider when someone, has left. Okay, and this is the final question. I may have one or two more that looks interesting. What key factors do law firms consider when hiring lateral partners? So when a law firm's hiring lateral partners, the main thing that they're concerned about is business. So, does the partner have work? Because if the partner has work, then the law firm can make money off them. So law firms exist for to support partners that have business. That's just how it works. That's how they operate. They need partners with business to be successful. And so that's the big thing that they look at. Does the person have business, or do they have the potential to generate business? And that's the main thing. Other times law firms will hire income partners and things like that. And then if they're hiring an income partner, like someone who's going to pay a salary, then they're going to be concerned about, what type of work does the person have expertise that we can give work to? That's kind of the main thing. Are we able to give them work that we're going to make money of, and do we have enough work? So the main factors that law firms consider, though, are just whether or not the person has business. And that's the most important thing to kind of remember when you're trying to, when you're in your careers, that you have to start getting business at some point. And that's what law firms are going to look for when they're hiring partners. And the more business that you have, the more marketable you're going to be. And the less business you have, the more difficult it's going to be to get back into a law firm. Sorry. Okay. This next question this is actually a big question. I'm just trying to take a couple more questions here because I really like some of these questions. Okay. How can I preserve my career trajectory without burning out? So there are firms where it's just so savage. Like there's so many hours you have to bill. It's so stressful, and it's just not good for your health or just the human condition. I mean, it's not right. And for some people, so you do not have to work in firms where you might be billing 2,500 hours a year. You can find ones where you don't have to work as many hours. Your career trajectory can mean different things. You have to decide, do I want to work in a big firm or a very stressful firm for the rest of my career? Is this something I can see myself doing? Or do I want to be in a different type of firm where I can work a long period of time? There's a report that we did at BCG that talks about a kind of career longevity, and there's definitely a lot more burnout, significantly more people that work at large firms. It's a high number. It's like 25% or 35% or something. So people do burn out in certain types of legal environments, and it has such a bad taste, at least such a bad taste in their mouth, that they don't want to practice any type of law. Like they're just burned out. They would do something else. And so that's not really the right way to think about it. So if you have 5 or 6 years of experience and you're at a firm that's burning you out, you can find a different firm where you're not going to burn out. And it's very interesting. There's firms if you are in a major city like New York, you can go work in upstate New York, and there's some very nice firms there where people literally, as a general rule, will go home at 5 and that sort of thing. I think I was talking to another firm like yesterday, and it was like Hodgson Ross or Buffalo Firm, and that's kind of the culture there. It's nothing like the way people work in New York City or anything like that. So you can often just go to smaller markets. You go to a smaller market, it's interesting. So if you're making $300,000 a year in New York, and then you move to Buffalo, and maybe you're making 170. Well, you'll actually probably, you're not paying New York City taxes, housing's cheaper, all these sorts of things. So you have a better lifestyle, and you may actually end up having more purchasing power working in a smaller market and having more hope of being a partner and generating business at a mid-sized firm or, than you would at a larger firm. So I think, one of the smartest things that I'm seeing more and more of it is attorneys from major firms going into smaller, middle market firms, the smaller firms, and that keeps them from burning out, and it keeps their career on track. So no one needs to work at a place where they're burning out. And you could burn out at a middle market firm or a small firm, and then just find a place where you're not going to burn out. One other thing I would just say about burnout is whatever job you're doing, you should enjoy the work. Like something should lighten up you should really think it's fun being a litigator or a criminal attorney or a corporate attorney. You should think it's fun. You should enjoy going out and talking to clients or giving advice and doing the work. You should enjoy it. And if you don't enjoy it, like the actual work, then that's the problem. It's not the environment. You can always change, and you can change the environment that you're in. Even if you're like whatever practice area, you could be a workers' comp attorney working in, I don't know, Cincinnati, Ohio. You could work at a firm that's burning you out. You can always probably find another firm doing workers' comp in Cincinnati where it's not the same demands, and maybe you're making just as much money. So most of the time, if you're burning out, it's just changing the type of firm you're at and working like, not working, working in, a firm that better matches your interest. Okay, one more question. I'm just kind of having so much fun with these questions. I want to get them all answered. Okay. Is there a grace period, like 1 or 2 weeks off a year? Let me just make sure I get this before it becomes problematic in a law firm's. I don't know what you mean by 1 or 2 weeks a year. Like you can take vacations certainly, and there's nothing wrong with that most of the times. But if there's a grace period, like after you lose your job, like what is a problematic period? If you lose your job, and it's been a couple weeks, it does become much harder for you to find a new job if you lost your job, because again, it raises all these questions. So if you lose your job at a firm, law firms don't want to get sued and that sort of thing, but they're often going to be sympathetic. You tell them, I want to stay on the website. I want to, I'm finding a job, and you try to find a job as quickly as possible while you're still theoretically employed. And you have to apply to a lot of places and really kind of go all out in your search if you want to succeed. Okay, well, I think that's all the questions. I apologize that I didn't get to all the questions today, but I do have your questions. I have to kind of get rolling here because I'm catching a flight. But again, I think I commend everyone for being on this webinar today. I think it was very powerful and useful information. Just again, one of these webinars can change the whole course of your career in life. And I hope that you've learned a lot today about kind of the mentality of attorneys, the importance of staying employed, how attorneys look at attorneys that aren't employed. You realize that it's important to try to stay where you're at, even if it's very unpleasant until you get a new job. The benefits of mid-sized firms versus larger firms. The benefits, the fact that you can, if you don't go to a great law school and you start out at a small firm, you can always move up if you get really good experience. The type of practice areas you should be in, the kind of the middle class attitude of attorneys working for clients and things, how attorneys view people that are taking time off, the ability to move to different geographic markets, the fact that you can always find a firm usually that matches your interest and where you're around different types of people that are going to help you. And many times, I'll just bring this up, when people get fired from firms, many times it has nothing to do with their performance or anything. Sometimes it's just like you're just a bad cultural fit or whatever, or maybe you make a stupid mistake. And so, people do get sick and have issues. But again, if you have issues that you need to take time off from a firm, I just would beg you to try to go back to your existing firm after that, because it just gives you continuity. You don't have to talk about the fact that I took 6 months off while I was working at whatever this firm is, and now I'm going back. You don't have to talk about any of that. Just, you just do the absolute, it looks like you have employment continuity. So never quit jobs, try not to get fired, try not to take too much time off. Realize that if you do, it's going to have a major impact on getting into the same quality of firm in the future. All right, thank you everyone for being on this webinar, and I will be back next week. Thanks again.